Test. Okay. Hello, everyone. TheAutonomousCollective.net, April 21st, 2025. Dis&dat information. So in my wanderings, I came across one view of a Marxian monetary theory of value. It seems like this is like something this guy wrote for a seminar somewhere, but who knows? Excuse me. As far as I can tell, this fellow works in the European Central Bank. But I think on his spare time, he tries to do other things, and this is one of those things. And it's pretty interesting. Well, to me anyway. And also, I added a thing that I got that I probably would have been better off as an undergraduate sort of coming across. But of course, I was an undergraduate before the internet. But anyway, delving into this is by Armando Marazzi, who I think works at the European Central Bank. And I think it's just useful because it combines a bunch of things fairly in a fairly compressed manner, and I think that that's the value of it. It's not like that it does sort of plows new ground, but it uses a couple of terms that I think that are somewhat applicable and also represent a kind of a direction that's necessary because some of the things that we've looked at tended to be of a period where, let's say, for example, there was an overemphasis or a variety of interesting reasons that people went back to Hegel, but only looked at or tended to look at the phenomenology of spirit and not at logic, either the large or the small one. And so that's sort of interesting to see where that might plug in. So that's what's going on here. It has a essay structure. It's a brief essay, and as I said, I think it was a paper written for something else. But it happens to be on the internet, and it's not published officially, but it's just sort of interesting. Introduction. John Maynard Keynes said once, Benthamite calculus based on an overvaluation of the economic criterion and the finale reduction ad absurdum of Benthamism known as Marxism. To some extent, this essay aims to disprove the Keynesian claim and to shed light on the Marxian monetary labor theory of value by drawing a clear difference from both instrumentalism, that is, of the Ricardo, neo-Ricardian Sraffa variety, and axiomatic deductivism, that is, neoclassical economics. However, my target is not to distinguish between good and evil. Otherwise, I would fall into the mistake that I want to denounce, but rather providing a very brief and necessary insufficient explanation of the Marxian theory, which is far from being fully understood. For some straightforward reasons, I will not deal with a number of collateral problems which the theory would request, but only with the very core of it. Therefore, whatever falls out of the first three paragraphs of the first book of Capital is not of interest to this essay. Number two, some founding categories. The Marxian monetary theory of value takes root in the first book of Capital that starts considering the inherent duplicity, the Zweiheit, in the elementary form of the capitalist economy, the commodity. This last dialectically implies the difference between two categories. I think you meant this latter. This is one of those things where maybe even there was a translation thing going on here. But anyway, this last dialectically implies the difference between two categories, use value, Gebrauchswert, namely something useful for someone who needs it, and exchange value, i.e., the quantitative relationship with other commodities. But what allows commodities to be exchanged is the key distinction concerning the workforce, the Arbeitskraft, um, the capacity of working or living labor, as Marx named it in Grundrisse a few years earlier, between concrete labor and abstract labor. The former is the particular production process of a particular use value, whereas the latter is the form taken by labor in general in a commodity producing society. We can speak in terms of abstract labor only when commodities are brought into equivalence with other concrete labors in the market system. It is precisely at this level that normalization, synchronization, and homogenization of labor happens. And Saad Philo is probably a good text to refer to in that context. Therefore, abstract labor, socially relevant, produces commodities as values. It means that values are crystals of human labor, that is, the waste of muscles, brain, hands, etc. In other words, to be common in this pure gelatin of indistinct human labors. Hence, the authentic duplicity is between use value and value itself, since the latter, measured in duration of time, depends on abstract labor. From the relationship between time and workforce emerges a new significant concept, the socially necessary labor time, i.e., the necessary labor time is the time per day or per week which workers must work in the average conditions of the industry of their day to produce the equivalent of their own livelihood at the socially and historically determined standard of living of their day. Sustenance, in other words. Thus, socially necessary labor determines value as frozen labor that renders commodities commensurable. And recall the other day we were looking at the commensurability issues. The note, I think it's the only footnote, when there is the quotation without reference, it means that the quotation is from Capital by Marx. The problem is that the pages of the Italian edition do not correspond to the English ones. Therefore, I prefer not to put the page for not creating disorder. So you can see there is a translation issue somewhere in there. Living labor, intended as life-giving fluid, freezes into crystals, that is, commodities. In this way, the subsumption of concrete labor into abstract labor is completed. However, in order for value not to remain something socially fictional, it has to embody into a phenomenal material form, that is, the form of money. According to his own words, Marx's aim is to undertake an endeavor never before attempted, that is, solving the enigma of money, i.e., demonstrating the genesis of the form of money, which has been there long before capitalism, by developing the value expression contained in the ratio of value of commodities from its simplest and least apparent shape until the evident form of money. So there is a kind of non-evident form of money and an evident form of money. Number three, the enigma of money. The moments of the Marxian syllogism tracing the Hegelian logic of the concept are essentially four. That is, A, the form of simple value, B, the form of total value, C, the general form of value, and D, the form of money. A, given two different commodities, A and B, A is the relative form, namely its value is expressed in B, and B is the equivalent form by means of which A is exchanged. So we have relative form and equivalent form. The equivalence between A and B is impossible to fix, that is, to make solid as a contraposition, because each of the two extremes might be both the relative form and equivalent. So it's dynamic in that sense, perhaps even in equilibrium. As a result, the single form of value is accidental. Or you could comment that's random. So that's sort of an interesting question. B is equal to A, as the labor contained in B is equal to the labor contained in A. In a nutshell, concrete labor becomes the phenomenal form of its opposed abstract labor. But whether the concrete labor appears as indistinct human labor, then it is commensurable to other labor. In the equivalent form, private labor becomes the form of its counterpart, labor in a directly social form. Hence, the simple form of the value of a commodity is the simple phenomenal form of the contradiction contained in it between use value and value. As an example, in contrast to mercantilists, exchange does not determine the size of the value of a commodity. Rather, the latter rules the former. So there is certain directionality, we could say, or dynamic relation between the two. C, the problem is that the relative form of value is unfinished. If each commodity is a unit of value close to others, then the series is not complete, and it risks what Hegel used to call bad infinity. In plain words, we miss a unitary phenomenal form of equivalent, which is able to express the infinite forms of equivalent that are often mutually exclusive and are not able to express exhaustively the phenomenal form of human labor. There is a need for a third term. You see, this is all very dialectic, isn't it? There is a need for a third term that expresses the value of commodities as something common to all, even if different from each use value. Only such a third can make all commodities appear as exchange values. Therefore, the form of general equivalent sublates, see there sublation finally occurs, sublates both the simple form and the total value as it gives a form of value generally social to the world of commodities. Consequently, all commodities are excluded from the general form of equivalent except one. D, the transition, Übergang, from C to D, the transition from C to D is realized when gold replaces A as a form of equivalent. In the end, the price is nothing but the simple relative expression of the value of a commodity in commodity terms, in commodity money, gold in Marx's times. With regard to the process of exchange, the market presupposes that people reciprocally, and legally recognize as private owners. The commodity, cynical and equalizing since birth, has use value for others, and thereby it is depositary of exchange value. Only the exchange realizes commodities as value, but the circulation of all commodities excludes the general equivalent money, the necessary result of a process of exchange. Yet, even the value of money depends on the necessary time to produce it. That money is social general chrysalis, is the social general chrysalis of each human labor. Social general chrysalis of each human labor means that the private labor that produces gold as money is transubstantiated, which is also an interesting thing. Rest in peace, Il Papa. Transubstantiated into immediately social labor, unmittelbare Gesellschaftliche. In so doing, Marx can determine quantitatively the magnitude of the value of the general equivalent in the form of noble metal, gold. The quantitative element of money is the only one which is immediately social, since not yet mediated by the market. Thanks to that, it is able to reflect qualitatively the abstract labor contained in other commodities that are, on the contrary, immediately social. So I know that seems a little schematic, but actually it makes some sense. It assumes the sublation process, the sort of continuous system of transformation that goes on and is motivated by exchange. It is socially motivated in that sense because you don't really exchange with yourself necessarily, although you could argue that Cryptocurrency might even do that. But anyway, that's an argument. Number four, dialectical transubstantiation. Rest in peace, Il Papa. Being said that, Marx described the movement of a ghostly entity which lives up to maintain itself in spite of doubling. The opposition inside the commodity between use value and value presents itself. Darstellung in a external opposition as splitting of that commodity into commodity and money. The ratio of the commodity with itself, that is, opposition between use value and value, self exhibits as splitting into commodity and commodity money, commodity dash money. And we've seen this configuration before. Unlike classical economy, the exhibited value is not substance, but subject. That is, this is the process of an identity self-developing through non-identities. When the ideality of value embodies into money, then this is incorporated value, verkorpeter Wert, into the use value of gold. Exactly here, the inversion, the Verkörung, unknown to nominalistic money theories, happens. From money seen as representant of all values to the fact that each product becomes representative of money. This is the process of dialectical transubstantiation. Now, that's just interesting, and it's interesting. Let me break here for a second and suggest to you that even if we reduce this down to, relatively banal or mundane sort of elements, kind of what goes on in, for example, merchandising or marketing, whereupon in some items you never get the actual price, or you get the price in the message combined towards the end so you can remember it. But the reality is, of course, in general, as opposed to in specific types of peculiarized advertising, you don't get the price. You simply get all of these things that might be the equivalent of price or values, right? Values, just bigger, better, whatever. Tastes good, you know. And it's as the tuna, as the canned tuna ad says, they don't want tunas with good taste. They want tunas what taste good. All right. Anyway, we digress. Number five, fetishism and reification. As a result of what we've just said, the fetishism of commodity character, the Fetisch character, derives from a semblance shine that naturalizes the social properties of products. Fetishismus is attached to products of labor, and it makes them appear, masking the social character of labor. Therefore, looking for the value of a commodity simply by looking at it, it is as if someone wanted to discover gravity by seeking in a stone, as opposed to, I suppose, picking it up and dropping it. Rather, it is, whatever. It's quoting from David Harvey, but one can riff on that to think about pet rocks. Similarly, for the concept of reification, social relationships have the appearance, the Einstellung, of relations between things. So this is the difference between relationships between things and people. The keystone is that value renders each outcome of labor a social hieroglyphic that neoclassical economists, or classical economists and also neoclassical economists, are not able to decipher. Now, the reason, let me break here for a second and say, well, maybe that's just because of the math. The mystic character of social outcome is due to the fact that in exchange relations of products, the socially necessary labor time to produce them is affirmed, and it presupposes the subsumption of concrete labor under that abstract. In Marxian words, the determination of the magnitude of value through work time is a secret, hidden under the apparent motions of values for the commodities. Upon a closer look, the crucial point is that the occult function of the commodity money is to dissemble social relations of production that put it in place. Human beings are economic masks in the theater of the social world, whose personal relationships of dependence present a complex combination exemplified and contained in the intricacy of the currency money. The reason, true yesterday as it is today, why classical economists could not see what instead Marx saw is that the former, and this translation doesn't make any sense, loves Robinsonade. um, whether it's a reference to the Robinson Crusoe thing, it's very unclear to me. That is, neoclassical economics assumes an atomistic approach in which individuals are the starting point of further analysis. It is then essential, and you see the assumption of an atomistic approach is, of course, the critique, as I was expressing last week on analytic Marxism, is that the critique of analytic Marxism is one built on, in some cases, a positivist one, or one that simply claims that uh, uh, it is atomistic in the sense of the emphasis in analytic Marxism by at least some people, like perhaps John Elster, on methodological individualism. But that's a very limited argument. It is then essential to comprehend that Marx can present a dialectical theory of money only insofar as the concept of commodity is defined in terms of identity of determinations mutually contradictory. And that can get us off into a whole thing onto Althusser ultimately. But anyway, number 6, conclusion. What has been misinterpreted by a great part of thinkers, even Marxists, starting from Engels, is exactly the innermost dialectic relating to the form of value, namely the cleavage between the first 2 paragraphs and the third one of the first book of Capital. In the theory of Marx, there is in play an intimate tangle between theory of value and theory of money. He conceived his theory of value as a critique of pre-monetary theories of value. More precisely, it can be said that in relation to simple circulation, it is essentially a theory of money. The merely substantial consideration of value ignores that the form of value is already essentially a theory of money. The ratio between substance and form is what subsists between essence, Wesen, and phenomenon. Essence cannot exist independently of its mode of manifestation. The form of money is the perfect figure of the form of value. Value is thus so apparent, erscheinende, money as processual capital. Value exists only as economic dimension of things. If not, the existence of money and price would be denied. To sum up, theory of value and theory of money cannot stay in an extrinsic relationship. Rather, the former, theory of value, cannot but manifest in the latter, that is, a theory of money. Commodities exchanged for money, since they're already commensurable as crystals, this is the congealment thing, right, of abstract labor, abstract because outcomes appear separated from living labor. Now, it would be a mistake thinking that money makes commodities homogeneous. On the contrary, money finds them already equivalent. The objective appearance produced by the process of circulation impels us to consider commodities commensurable owing to money, while it is only the commensurability of commodities that turns gold into money. So you can see that there's a certain asymmetry, but yet there's a system, as it were. Therefore, according to the labor theory of value, money is a universally recognized materialization, materiatur of abstract wealth, namely a universal phenomenal manifestation of value, namely a universal phenomenal manifestation of value. The representation of commodity into money is the expression of value according to a movement which goes from inside to outside, i.e., from production to circulation, which is book 2, volume 2 of Capital, or at least part of it anyway. So anyway, the ideal entity of value can govern the process insofar as the market realizes the value that is already potentially money, much like labor power is potentially labor. Value is real only as apparent value, that is, as ideal or real money, or as processual, that is to say, as capital. In Hegelian terms, the form is the content that self reveals. So this is very Hegelian, but I think in a relatively schematic way, this does describe sublation and a bunch of other things. And for me, that's just useful because it is schematic. It forms the way in which you can explain this without going through a lot of hand wringing and worrying about language. And it would be, of course, the pre-monetary thing is a kind of interesting idea of what counts as a pre-monetary. So, anyway, it's an interesting um, commentary aside from the strangeness in which uh, you have an Italian guy who I think probably works in Germany or France, no, Germany, I think it is Germany, um, trying to make sense of German translated into Italian, then into English. So there's stuff there. Now, the second part of this little yammering today is a little longer, and it is what I would have preferred to see as an undergraduate, sort of laid out, and then I could have read, Capital much easier or something. Uh, it is a teaching unit in a course on the theory of development, likely in a global South country, or designed for that anyway. And so it's interesting because it has it all sort of summarized easily, for your A levels or O levels. So anyway, it comes in, it has little sections which I've excluded. Otherwise, you might freak out about questions asking you to actually remember stuff. So this particular thing doesn't have the questions, the study questions included. In the previous unit, you studied the classical theories of development. In this unit, we concentrate on the Marxian theory of development. It was propounded by Karl Marx, most influential, blah, 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 of the 20th century. Uh, he is the celebrated author of Das Kapital. Marx's approach to understanding the economy is intellectually independent of his advocacy of revolutionary socialism. That's an interesting claim. Adherents of Marxian theory consider Marx's economic theories to be the basis of a viable analytic framework, ooh, that word again, and an alternative to more conventional neoclassical economics. Marx was the first person to predict the inevitable doom of capitalism. Well, yeah. He said capitalism is destined to collapse, not because of population growth, diminishing returns, or stagnation, which is where we are right now, but due to sociological reasons, i.e., the class struggle. The concept of socialism entered the main currents of economic doctrines because of Marx. The Marxist school of thought challenged the foundations of classical theory. After studying this unit, you should be able to explain Marxian philosophy and the Marxian theory of capital accumulation, narrate the Marxian theory of economic development, and illustrate the theory of surplus value, and give it a critical appraisal of Marxian theory. Yes, indeed. All lots of promises. Now, 2.2, Marxian philosophy. Before going into the Marxian theory of development, it's essential to know about Marxian philosophy. Marx's philosophy is known as dialectical materialism. According to his philosophy, matter is the driving force of all historical changes. By matter, he meant man's relationship to nature as characterized by the mode of production. Thus, Marx gave an economic interpretation of history, material history, which can be summarized in two propositions, and they are theories of development. Number one is the basic factor in the historical evolution of society is the mode of production. It is the mode of production that explains the whole superstructure of ideas and institutions. See, you already have the base superstructure argument. Number two, recall, of course, that base superstructure is not mentioned in Marx. Society develops in accordance with the dialectical principle inherent in its structure. Marx maintained that historically, social change takes place in a regular pattern. The sequence of the Marxian stages of social evolution is primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, and socialism. And then ultimately, it's what we might imply is that pure communism at the end. Marx attempted to explain how contradictions in the capitalist system will lead to the downfall of the system, which will be replaced by socialism, describing his current place in history. The two important constituents of Marxian philosophy are dialectical materialism, number one, and number two, historical materialism. These are discussed below. Marxian philosophy is termed dialectical materialism. Marx's philosophical disposition was greatly influenced by and at the same time vigorously opposed by the German philosopher Hegel. The influence of Hegel is clear in Marx's adoption of Hegel's dialectical method. Dialectical method assumes a definite logical position which maintains that we reach a higher concept by negative judgments, which, because of the negation, is richer than the original one. Any finite concept, when considered as a predicate of reality, thesis, will lead us to its opposite, antithesis. But as the contradiction is repulsive to the original, the cycle does not stop there, because society moves to the third stage, synthesis, which reconciles the mutually opposed concepts and provides a better description of reality. Thus, in the dialectical process, the thesis and the antithesis do not cancel each other, but are preserved and enriched in the synthesis. This is the whole sublation business. According to Hegel, the world is in the process of continuous development, and development takes place according to the dialectical formula. In this respect, Marx agrees with Hegel. However, he differs on the question of the motive force of development. For Hegel, the motive force is a mystical entity, i.e., spirit, which causes human history to develop according to the dialectical process. Hegel's philosophy was dialectical idealism. Marx, on the contrary, evolved a philosophy of dialectical materialism in which he considered matter, and not spirit, as the driving force of historical development. It is this philosophy of dialectical materialism on which Marx based his materialistic interpretation of history. Number two, historical materialism. Let us now discuss the historical materialism put forward for consideration by Marx. Marx applied his philosophical ideas to society and gave an economic interpretation of history. Historical materialism is the study of society and the laws of its development. Historical materialism as a philosophy has the following features. Number one, it is a philosophical study which deals with objective laws of social development. These laws are independent of man's consciousness. Like the laws of nature, they're knowable and are applied by man in his practical activity. Number two, it deals with social laws as distinct from the laws of nature. While the laws of nature reflect the operation of spontaneous forces, while the laws of social development are always manifested through people who act as intelligent beings. As society is inseparable from men, social laws manifest themselves only through human activity. Number three, it studies the general objective laws governing the development of society. It investigates the most general phases of world history and the objective causes of their appearance and disappearance. Number four, it is more than a method of investigating social phenomena. It explains historical tendencies. History proceeds from lower to higher forms of social organization. The change to higher forms is inevitable because the old forms stand in the way of further progress. So, the subject matter of historical materialism includes the study of the mode of production, the dialectics of the mode of production, and the historical evolution of society. A, the mode of production. The mode of production has a logic of its own. According to Marx, the production of material wealth is the basis of human existence, and the mode of production of wealth is the determining factor of social development. Society as a distinct entity is part of nature. It is inseparable from the rest of nature and constantly interacts with it. People cannot exist without food, clothing, shelter, and other necessities of life. Nature, however, does not provide things ready-made. Thus, people must work to produce these things. Labor, or productive activity, is therefore the basis of social life. The mode of production which determines the economic structure of society has two aspects. Number one, the forces of production, and number two, the relations of production. Now, the forces of production. Number one, this refers to the organization, skill, and status of labor, the techniques and traditions of production, the geographical conditions and degree of knowledge to utilize materials and resources. Whereas the forces of production determine the relationship between man and nature. Regardless of the form of society, the interaction between man and nature consists in the unity of three elements. Number one, labor. Number two, the objects of labor. And number three, the means of labor. Theories of development. Labor is productive human activity that is based at transforming natural objects to satisfy human wants. The objects of labor are the things to which human labor is applied. In the earth, all raw materials is the universal object of labor. The means of labor are the things used by man to act upon objects of labor. They include all instruments of labor, such as machines, tools, building, transport, etc. Objects and means of labor together are called means of production. The means of production refers to the sum total of material conditions without which production is impossible. Number two, the relations of production. This refers to a particular set of property relations which determines the nature of society's class structure. The relations of production, or the economic relations between people, among people, determine the relation between man and machine. These relations are called production relations. According to Marx, production relations are based on the form of ownership of the means of production. The form of ownership depends on A, the position, dominating or subordinate, of various social groups in production, B, their relations exploitative or cooperative in the production process, C, the distribution of wealth, i.e., the mutual exchange of their activity. The components of the mode of production are summarized in the following chart. And you can see this, that, it does have a schematic relation. There's the mode of production. It has forces, which are labor and means and objects of labor and means of labor. If you describe it, it can be described that way, among other ways. We talked about energy before, etc. And on the right, relations of production, that is ownership of the means of production, that is property. Then the position of social groups, relations between social groups, and the distribution of material wealth, often described by some people as power, among other things. B, dialectics of the mode of production. Society develops with a dialectical principle inherent in its structure. This means that the mode of production has a logic of its own. The mode of production changes because of inherent necessity, and it's not due to any external force. The working of the mode of production is governed by three laws. And these three laws come back to us in all kinds of forms. It is, of course, the same set of dialectical relations described, for example, by the Frankfurt School. That there is one, the law of unity. The law states that the productive forces and the productive relations taken together determine the mode of production of material wealth. They're linked by an inner unity, i.e., a specific level of productive forces requires specific production relations. And number two, the law of correspondence. This law states that production relations tend to correspond to the productive forces. The changes in the productive forces induce adjustment in the production relations. The correspondence of production relations to productive forces operates only as an economic tendency. It imposes no rigid mechanical dependence of the former on the latter. It is not a law of obligatory correspondence. Number three, it kind of leads into number three, the law of conflict. This law states that conflict stems from the intrinsic nature of the two sides of the mode of production, i.e., the forces of production and those relations of production. This conflict is not accidental. It is inherent in the mode of production. It brings development in the mode of production. C. Historical evolution of society. The relations of production form the economic basis of society, while political and legal views and ideology and institutions make up its superstructure. See, you have base superstructure already. The superstructure is determined by and acts on economic basis. The historical sum total of productive forces, economic basis, and the superstructure make up the socio-economic system. The totality of production relations, that is, property, people's relations, and distribution of wealth, constitutes the economic basis of a society. The economic basis plays an important role in the society. It serves as the real foundation of social superstructure, which includes political, legal, philosophical, moral, religious, artistic, and their corresponding relations, institutions, and organizations. Thus, the economic basis is that aspect of the mode of production which directly molds the face of society, its ideas, and institutions. The superstructure plays a very significant role in social development. According to Marx, the history of society consists of the history of the sequence of socioeconomic formations or the replacement of one mode of production by another mode of production. According to him, there are 5 different stages, and I showed you this last week, of social evolution: primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, socialism. Class relations do change with a change in the socioeconomic structure of each stage. 2.3, the Marxian economic system. In this section, you will study the Marxian economic system in the context of development. The Marxian economic system is composed of 4 components: the capitalist economic system, A; B, the labor theory of value; C, the theory of surplus value; D, the theory of capital accumulation. A, the capitalist economic system. According to Marx, capitalism is an economic system with the following elements. 1, a capitalistic society is divided into 2 classes, capitalists and the workers. Capitalists own the means of production while the workers don't. The workers sell their services, labor power, to the capitalists for wages. Number 2, a commodity forms the unit of production in a capitalistic society. A commodity is defined as the carrier of use value, that is utility, and exchange value, that is its relation with other commodities. Number 3, the growth of capitalism is based on the exploitation of labor. Labor produces surplus value, which is appropriated by the capitalist. Number 4, all commodities are produced with a profit motive, and the exchange equation is little m, big C, big M. The capitalist purchases the commodity C, that is labor power as commodity, with money, lowercase m, small m, with an intention to sell it after production for money, big M. The motive force, number 5, the motive force behind capitalism is profit. Capitalist always reinvests the profit in his business to upgrade technology. Yes, there will be exceptions, etc. 6, capitalists adopt labor-saving machinery, which creates a reserve army of the unemployed. It results in growing the misery of the working class. B, the labor theory of value. According to Marx, the value of a commodity is determined by the quantity of labor required to produce it. Our commodity is both the use value and exchange value. When commodities represent use values, they are qualitatively different due to the different forms of useful labor used in them. Marx was an advocate of the labor theory of value and believed that all production belongs to labor because workers produce all value within society. Marx predicted that capitalism would produce growing misery for workers as competition for profit leads capitalists to adopt labor-saving machinery. The Marxian industrial reserve army concept is another way of looking at technological unemployment. It is not a biological law, but is an essential feature of the capitalist system. For Marx, a surplus population was largely the consequence of capitalistic tendencies of capital accumulation, labor displacing technological change, and the concentration of capital. The following points explain how the capitalistic process of production leads to the creation of an ever-increasing population. Number 1, Economic development under capitalism depends on the accumulation of capital, which in turn depends upon surplus value or profits. As long as there's profit, there will be continuous reinvestment in the production process. Yes, there are exceptions. Number two, in static conditions, capitalists accumulate capital and reinvest it to expand production and to reap further profits. Since all round expansion in production results in an increase in demand for labor, i.e., higher wages, the surplus value has a tendency to fall. It provides additional reason to accumulate more capital. Number three, under dynamic conditions, the greater amount of surplus value goes to those producers who are capable of producing advanced technology in production. Technological progress, according to Marx, means adoption of capital intensive and labor replacing technology. Hence, the race for capital accumulation among the capitalists raises the capital output ratio, which reduces profits. Ultimately, the capitalist suffers. Not much. C. The theory of surplus value. Labor power has the unique characteristics of being capable of producing more than its own value when it is put to productive use. The excess of value produced by labor power over its own value is called surplus value. The aim of the capitalist is to always increase this surplus value. Surplus value refers to the extra labor of the worker for which he receives nothing from the producer or employer. It is appropriated by the capitalist. This implies exploitation of labor. It is the only cause of class conflict or class struggle. And I'm going to end in a second here because there's lots of, well, it's not lots of math. It is simply placing all of the terms that you see not only in Marx, but in everything after Marx about trying to define our terms in easy, hopefully, easy equations and representative variables. Marx's theory of surplus value can be explained by the following set of equations. And yes, they do work actually, and they do explain Marx. But yes, people freak out when they see these things. So number one is total income, constant capital, variable capital, and surplus value. Y equals C plus Y plus S. Number two is little s, lowercase s is the rate of surplus value equals surplus value, big S, over divided by variable capital. Number three, K, the organic composition of capital, that is capital intensity, equals big C, constant capital, divided by constant capital plus variable capital. And four, pi, the rate of profit, equals big S, that is surplus value, over constant plus variable capital, which equals rate of surplus value times bracket, that is 1 minus the organic composition of capital, and there's an asterisk. The equation shows that pi is directly related to S and inversely related to K. It means that the profitability of the producer depends directly on his capacity to exploit labor and indirectly on the organic composition of capital. This is explaining what we just talked about. Due to severe competition, the capitalist tries to raise productivity. Therefore, the degree of automation, remember we talked about that last week, the degree of automation rises, and in turn, the organic composition of capital grows. It means that the rate of profit increases with the rise in the exploitation of labor and falls with the rise in constant capital. You know, there's displacement going on, right? Substitution in that sense. Therefore, the capitalist suffers from continual reduction of his profit and profitability. Capitalism has built-in doom. It will meet its natural death eventually in the long run. And like Keynes says, in the long run, we're all dead. Now, the asterisk goes to the proof, which, yes, there is a proof. It's an algebraic proof, and it's not too horribly problematic, but you can work through this, I think. You can see how, you know, you work out the identities and you flip things around, and pretty much, you know, pi equals S times 1 minus K. Now, sorry about that. The theory of capital accumulation. Marx propounded the theory of capital accumulation. Marx contends that under static conditions, capitalists are compelled to accumulate due to two reasons. Number one, the emergence of surplus value in capitalist production induces the capitalist to accumulate and to reinvest. Number two, the mass effect of all-round expansion of production is an increase in the demand for labor, the rise in wage rates, and the reduction in surplus value, because surplus value is simply the excess of total produce over the subsistence produce. This is how Marx describes it. This provides another reason for an individual capitalist to accumulate. So this is capital accumulation, right? A capitalist society is marked by continuous change. Under dynamic conditions, the largest share of surplus value goes to those producers who are able to introduce the most advanced and efficient technology in production. The race for capital accumulation among the capitalists compelled them to adopt new technology and gain huge profits. Capital accumulation depends on the ability of the capitalist to raise the surplus value. Surplus value can be increased in three ways. We're almost over. By number one, reducing the wage rates. Number two, by extending the working hours. Number three, by increasing the productivity of labor. The first method cannot be pursued for a long time as it curtails labor supply. The second method can be relied upon only temporarily. Thus, Marx put more emphasis on the third method of increasing productivity of labor. This involves technological improvements. Capital-intensive techniques increase the total output produced by a given labor force and thus increase surplus value. Capital accumulation and technological progress leads to the following three tendencies. Concentration of capital. Competition compels capitalists to reduce the prices of their commodities. This is done by increasing the productivity of labor through capital-intensive technology. But the small capitalists fail in this competition, so they are compelled to exit from their business. Marx terms it as expropriators are expropriated. This tendency of concentration has three effects. It results in a larger scale of production. The polarization between capitalists and workers is more sharpened. Number three, the capitalist production becomes social in nature, though in its property relations, it's still private. Thank you, libertarians. An individual worker is now part of a large social productive process, and an individual capitalist is the trustee of the society. Number two, immiseration of the proletariat. Capital accumulation results in the growing misery of the working class. The process of immiseration, that is, increased unemployment, underemployment, and reduction in wages of the proletariat, operates in following two ways. Number one, capitalism produces an industrial reserve army or surplus toiling class. In other words, the capitalist system discards workers at a faster rate than it hires them. This is because of two reasons. Under dynamic conditions, when labor-saving technology is adopted widely, the industrial reserve army has a tendency to grow. B, due to the concentration of capital, larger capitalists prey on small capitalists. Thus, small producers with little hands who cannot face the competition from big producers also join the industrial army. Number two, the condition of the few workers who remain employed also deteriorates because growing unemployment enables capitalists to reduce the wages to subsistence levels. B, capitalists also lengthen the working days and hours for more surplus. C, capitalists resort to hiring women and children at still lower wages than men. Number three, the falling rate of profit. Capital accumulation results in immiseration for the workers and the falling rate of profits for the capitalists. According to Marx, the falling rate of profit is the consequence of two other basic tendencies. One, extensive use of capital-intensive technology tends to increase capital per person, or the organic composition of capital, K. With capital accumulation, capitalists try to get maximum production at minimum costs through the use of capital-intensive technology. And number two, Marx assumes constant rate of surplus values. These two tendencies lead to the third eventuality, i.e. the falling rate of profit. This can be easily understood with the help of a fundamental equation, which we just looked at. Pi equals S times 1 minus K. This equation implies that the rate of surplus value, the rise in organic composition of capital, K, reduces the rate of profit. Let's see. Let me just stop there because there's nothing but more stuff here. I could complete this tomorrow. We may do that. Um, there is a conclusion with the critical appraisal of Marxian theory. And yes, there are issues. It's wrong to conclude that a rise in the organic composition of capital K leads to a fall in profit. Any rise in K leads to an increase in productivity and improvement in technology. Both these results tend to arrest the declining trend of profit until you invest in Bitcoin, for example. But anyway, so that's that. I've finished my time here. Let's see if there are any trenchant comments. Capitalists got to eat too. Yeah. Uh, yes, indeed. I miss Nancy too. I miss Nancy a lot. Uh, the Pacific idyllic. Yes, indeed. Gates of heaven. Yes. Some people are Ohio gozaimasu. So desu ne. Anyway, good morning, Joe. And anyway, so yes, all righty. So that I will stop share, exit from the live stream and return you to our regularly scheduled program. The memorial workshop is at the top of the hour. Thank you for your attention. And you can find the link to this in the chat, or you can come to theautonomouscollective.net. Thank you.
So basically, all the ingrates comments had nothing to do with your talk. Is that it?
Were there ingrates today? Were there was there were there trolling comments? I actually
No trolling, just
shut
unrelated.
shut that S